seekers to Rwanda after the first one was effectively grounded last night just before takeoff. At the last minute, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in favour of an Iraqi man who was due to be on board the plane, saying he faced a real risk of irreversible harm. Well, the Home Secretary has now said she was disappointed by the ruling and that the government would not be put off by what she called inevitable last-minute legal challenges. Our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus, reports.
On the south coast today, no sign that the prospect of being sent to Rwanda is deterring new arrivals. The government's policy to remove asylum seekers to East Africa is on hold, but the Home Secretary this lunchtime insisted it will happen.
We remain committed to this policy. These repeated legal barriers are, Madam Deputy Speaker, very similar to those that we experience with all other removal flights, and we believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun.
Yesterday's flight cost a couple of £100,000 but never took off. In Strasbourg, the European Court of Human Rights said first the legality of the whole scheme must be decided by British courts. Labour says the whole policy is flawed.
Even under their plans, they're not proposing that everyone who comes across the English Channel goes to Rwanda. I think their estimates are around about 20 to 30%. So I'm afraid it's not going to be a deterrent. It's not going to work. It probably will be abandoned and it will have cost the UK taxpayer millions and millions and millions of pounds.
One application the court ruled on was brought by an Iraqi man who arrived in the UK a month ago. Doctors said he may have been the victim of torture. He was told his asylum claim was inadmissible. His lawyers say it's open to the government to argue before the court in Strasbourg if it wants to overturn the decision, or it can change the law in the UK.
Alternatively, it could do what in a democracy it might be expected to do and put through a law. Put the matter to Parliament and have a statute that would approve and would embody its policy, which would be fully debated in Parliament, and the courts could not then touch it.
Is it time for the UK to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights, Prime Minister?
That idea, withdrawing from the convention and court that enshrine and uphold fundamental rights, and which the UK helped create after the Second World War, is what some Tory MPs are now advocating, but far from all would support such a move.
I don't think it's right for us as a party to abandon our historic commitment to the European Convention. It was British Conservative lawyers who wrote it after the war. I believe in fundamental human rights, as I think most of my colleagues, if I not all my colleagues, do.
Deterring dangerous journeys and defeating the smuggling networks is what all agree should be the outcome of any policy. But for now, it seems it's the courts, not the politicians, who will decide what happens next. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Westminster.
Earlier we spoke to our news correspondent Helena Wilkinson, who is in Dover, where there have been further attempts to cross the channel today.
Just to give you an idea of where we are at the harbour in Dover. If you've ever got a ferry from Dover, we're not too far away from where you would get the passenger ferry, but you can just see behind us a jetty. That is where, once the migrants are brought off the border force boat, they are then walked along that jetty in small groups by officials and then walked a bit further down to a building a bit further down from where we are. That is the first area, if you like, in which they enter, and then they're taken on a bus a short journey away to be processed. Today, so far, we've seen around 150 migrants arrive here just behind us. They were picked up in boats in the channel, and then we saw the Border Force vessels on 2 occasions come just behind us with dozens of migrants on board. And then as they made their way past us, we saw women, children, most of them still had their life jackets on, in one of the boats, which you can just see behind us, that black boat, inflatable boat just behind us. That was one of the boats that was used in one of the crossings today, and it's actually been cleared at the moment, but before we saw there were 2 children's inflatable rings in there and also handheld water pumps as well. We asked some of the migrants as they were passing us which country they had come from. A number of them responded. Some of them said they had come from Afghanistan, Egypt, and Albania and also Iraq, and one of them did a peace sign as he walked past us, and another did a thumbs up. So a huge number already have arrived here today, around 150, and despite all of the government initiatives, the weather plays a key role in kind of determining how many migrants might make that crossing. And today it's sunny, clear skies, very calm waters, not a huge amount of wind, and so that's why we're seeing the bigger numbers of migrants making that crossing from France here to Dover.
Well, as I was saying, ministers say they're planning a new flight of asylum seekers to Rwanda after the first plane was grounded last night after a ruling from the European Court of Human Rights. We're joined now by the immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal. Very good to have you with us and welcome to BBC News. I wonder if you can help explain something to me. 3 British courts decided that this process was legal. How is it possible then that the European Court of Human Rights overturned their decisions or their findings?
Because everyone has a fundamental right to appeal and to apply to the European Court of Human Rights, which is there to make sure that individual states do not erode the human rights of individuals. And in fact, it's more of a, they put a stay on the flight saying, well, hold on, the flight shouldn't take off until it's decided whether the whole scheme is legal or not. And that hearing is yet to be heard in July.
I understand. OK, so what is your view of this policy to send these people to Rwanda?
Well, I think we've often heard from commentators and from MPs that it's humane. It's almost like we're shirking our responsibility. We're outsourcing our responsibility. And remember, even if these people are granted asylum in Rwanda, they'll have to stay in Rwanda. There's no guarantee that they'll be brought back to the UK, which is where, in fact, they have applied asylum for. So it's more of a deterrent, and even that doesn't make sense, because what the government is hoping is that we have only 500 places in Rwanda, that by sending 500 people to Rwanda, it will deter 27,500 people from crossing every year. Now, you've just told us that in the past few days, 150 people have landed, I think today, 200 the day before. These people aren't deterred. It's not going to be a deterrent. When we send 500, which could arrive in 3 days, what are we going to do with the people that come in the next 3 days after that, or in fact the next 12 months after that? So it hasn't been thought out.
We don't know that though, do we? Because none of these flights have taken off yet. So in other words, surely by a flight leaving, it establishes the principle and therefore establishes the deterrent, doesn't it?
That's what you'd think, but to be fair, the only thing that deters people doing the crossings or the gangs is the actual weather. Like we've said, the only time that the crossings have stopped or dipped is when the weather is bad. Otherwise, they've remained constant. And remember, the gangs don't care whether the migrant is sent to Rwanda afterwards or not. Their job is to just make sure the person reaches the UK. So whether the person is deterred or not, whether the gangs are deterred, who are the ones actually operating this and making money from it, there's no deterrent to the gangs. It's almost like saying that we'll punish the drug user and hopefully the drug dealers will stop dealing drugs. That doesn't really happen.
As we were hearing from Helena, more than 10,000 people have arrived on small boats already this year. That's 3 times the number who had arrived by this time last year. How do you deter them then from making this journey?
Well, one option is to have safe places in France, and France did offer this, where they can apply for asylum from, so they wouldn't have to risk the journey. That would allow us to find out who these people are, fingerprint them before they land in the UK, process their claims while they're in France, and then decide who to give asylum to and who not. That would deter a lot of people then having to come here, because the selling point for the gangs is you can't claim asylum until you reach the UK. So the migrant thinks, I have to physically put my foot in the UK, and hence they have to pay for the journey to come over. This is where the gangs make the money. If there was an option to claim asylum for, say, in France, the gangs then couldn't use that as a selling point.
OK. Harjap Singh Bangal, very good to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining us on BBC News.